Imagine piloting the fastest machine in the world, capable of leaving any enemy behind, yet knowing that if you advance the throttle too quickly, the engine behind you turns into a grenade. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was the pinnacle of German engineering, but a series of bizarre decisions and technical shortcomings transformed it from the savior of the Third Reich into a dangerous flying bomb for its own pilots. On paper, the Messerschmitt Me-262 was a historical rupture. While the Allies still relied on piston engines, with their mechanical limits already well understood, Germany put into the skies a fighter capable of exceeding 800 kilometers per hour. It was not merely faster, it operated in a different physical category. In a dive, it simply vanished. In pursuit, it was unreachable. However, 70% of the danger did not come from the enemy. It came from its own engine. The revolutionary Jumo 004 engines were as brilliant as they were treacherous. Pioneers of jet aviation, they barely lasted between 10 and 25 flight hours, just enough for a few combat missions before needing replacement. Manufactured in haste with improvised alloys due to the desperate shortage of nickel and chromium, any abrupt acceleration, steep dive, or simple temperature variation could trigger compressor stall, sudden flameout, or, in the worst-case scenario, an internal explosion that turned the entire aircraft into a flying bomb. The Luftwaffe's greatest advantage became its own trap. Faced with this situation, the strategy was to train pilots to tame the Me-262. Most German aviators had experience only with piston engines, where throttle response was immediate and predictable. In the Me-262, a completely different technique was required. Always gradual acceleration, smooth power adjustments, and constant monitoring of engine temperatures. Any deviation from these procedures significantly increased the risk of failure and potential explosions. By late 1944, the war was virtually lost for Germany. Yet the pressure to deploy the Me-262 in combat only intensified. The Allies escalated their bombing of refineries, and with fuel shortages worsening, training hours were drastically reduced. At the same time, Germany had already lost thousands of experienced pilots. This further deepened the lack of preparation among new aviators. With limited experience and minimal training, mastering the Messerschmitt Me-262 became extremely difficult. The first practical evidence of this fragility emerged with the experimental unit Erprobungskommando 262. During one of its first interception missions, some aircraft failed to take off at all. The small Riedel auxiliary engine, responsible for starting the Jumo 004s, frequently malfunctioned. Without it, the jet simply remained motionless on the runway. Half a squadron could be neutralized before even getting airborne. Those who did take off faced another problem: black smoke, irregular flames, and instability before even reaching operational altitude. The true danger lay in the Junkers Jumo 004 engines. Conceptually, they were brilliant. The axial compressor reduced frontal area and allowed aerodynamic efficiency impossible for bulky radial engines. It was cutting-edge engineering. But engineering requires appropriate materials. Under ideal conditions, turbine blades should have been made from high-temperature-resistant alloys rich in nickel and cobalt. These metals withstand extreme heat and sustained rotation without significant deformation. Germany in 1944, however, no longer had consistent access to such resources. Blockades and bombings had compromised entire supply chains. Turbine blades began to be manufactured from coated, mild steel. They worked, but they operated at the limit. The average service life of a Jumo 004 could be under 25 hours. The engine that gave the aircraft its strategic advantage was also its greatest vulnerability. If the throttle was advanced too rapidly, injected fuel exceeded optimal combustion capacity. Temperature rose abruptly. The turbine blades, already operating near their thermal limit, began to undergo progressive deformation, a phenomenon known as creep. Some pilots reported watching comrades vanish in a fireball while attempting to increase power during pursuit. It was not enemy fire. It was thermal failure. Near Mach 0.85, airflow altered the behavior of the stabilizer. The nose became heavy, the phenomenon known as Mach tuck. Correcting this tendency required caution. Excessive control input could generate high structural loads on the swept wings. While not an everyday problem, there were instances of structural failure under extreme conditions. Many Me-262s were lost, not in the air, but on the runway. The tricycle landing gear was modern, yet it required relatively long and stable runways. Synthetic tires, produced as substitutes for natural rubber, were less durable. A blowout during takeoff, with full fuel tanks, could result in immediate fire. Furthermore, slow acceleration at low speeds made the jet vulnerable to Allied attacks during takeoff and landing. The Me-262 represented the future of military aviation. That is indisputable. But it also represented the limit of German industrial capacity at that stage of the war. Its technology required materials that were no longer available. It required logistics that no longer existed. It required time. And time was precisely what the regime lacked. The result was an extraordinary but premature aircraft, capable of impressive achievements, yet equally capable of self-destruction. Its pilots did not face only Mustangs and Thunderbolts. They faced heat, fatigued metal, and non-existent margins for error. The Me-262 did not fail for lack of technological vision. It failed because the environment that produced it was collapsing. It crossed the threshold into the jet age before the world was ready to sustain it, and it charged that advance with constant risk to those who flew it.